It was the fear of the Muscovite hordes, the ancient savage reputation of the Cossacks, the terror of men with slant eyes that drove these people out of their neat homes, away from the fields and farms on which they had worked so hard. Orderly, submissive, sick at heart, they made their painful part in it. On August the 20th, the day the Germans entered Brussels, their eastern army was defeated at Gumbinnen. Königsberg, capital of East Prussia, was threatened by the Russian advance, and on August the 23rd, the day of Mons, the Russians won another victory at Frankenau. But it was their last. The telegraph wires bore their messages right across Germany and as far as Belgium to summon new German leaders. Hindenburg and Ludendorff were sent post-haste by Moltke to stop the rot. Out of the confusion of retreat on a battlefront over 100 miles wide, they shaped a bold plan. The Russian Second Army was now dangerously ahead of the First Army, with the Masurian lakes lying between them. Using the well-developed railway system of East Prussia to its limits, the Germans would strike at the isolated Second Army, now nearing the insignificant village of Tannenburg. A German general with a French name, von François, a Russian general with a German name, Rennenkampf, a German general with a Scottish name, Mackinson, and a Russian general with a tragic name, Samsonov. These were the chief actors in the scene which followed. The lesser actors were some 500,000 soldiers who did the fighting and marching. This time it was mostly marching, particularly for the Germans, racing to cut Samsonov's line of retreat, to smash his army before Rennenkampf could bring him help. It took 5 days to do it, but at the end of them, the Russian Second Army was a wreck. 90,000 Russian soldiers were taken prisoner, rounded up like stock in a corral, and the head cowboy was François. General Samsonov walked away into a wood and shot himself. So East Prussia was saved. The trim towns would not be shattered. Cossacks would not burn the farmsteads. Instead, the war would now flow eastwards. What was more, Schlieffen's plan had stood the test, which was ironical indeed, since it was on the point of being abandoned. Not that any weakening of the German purpose was yet visible in the West. Each day brought new discouragements for the Allies there, as the flail thumped harder and harder against the left of the Allied line, while the center continued to give way, and the right held on only by the skin of its teeth. On one man, the pressure intensified daily. The Allied Commander-in-Chief, General Joffre, each day bringing him new questions, but never an answer.
My first task was to seek the cause of these failures in order to find a remedy. Was it the enemy's numerical superiority? It appeared that as regards numbers, we were considerably superior to him.
Was it the French army's leaders who were at fault? If so, Joffre knew what to do. The Minister of War told him,
Eliminate the old fossils without pity.
And this Joffre would do. But there was another question, which was more disturbing.
The French soldier is very impressionable, losing confidence as readily as he acquires enthusiasm, yielding to depression as quickly as he becomes exalted. Would he be able to hold out under this terrible strain?
And Joffre also asked himself a question which went to the very roots of everything.
Does the trouble lie in the strategic disposition of our forces?
On August the 24th, General Joffre reached a conclusion which shaped history.
What concerned me most was the encircling movement which the Germans appeared to be developing on our left. Now, it was the British alone who could offset this menace, and yet it was precisely this army to which I had no right to give orders. I had to content myself with suggesting. It seemed to me necessary, above all, to place on the left of the British army French troops to which I had the right to give orders.
This simple proposition contained a mighty seed, and everything that happened confirmed the strength of Joffre's idea. On August the 26th, he went to his second meeting with Sir John French. The scene was witnessed by a young liaison officer, Lieutenant Spears.
Joffre began to explain the purport of an order, extremely important, he'd issued. Whilst he was doing so, in walked Lansac, bustling in. Then Joffre went on explaining this order of his, when Sir John French said, "What about this order?" I haven't seen an order. Whereupon General Wilson, the Sub-Chief of Staff, explained rather awkwardly, I thought, that some order had been received during the night, but it hadn't been dealt with yet. I got the impression it had been translated. When General Joffre realized that his orders hadn't even been received and read by the British, he seemed overwhelmed with discouragement. It was the only time I've ever known that he seemed to lose heart himself, to be completely deflated.
This was an abject moment for General Joffre.
When I left British headquarters in the early afternoon, I carried away with me a serious impression of the fragility of our extreme left. And I anxiously asked myself if it could hold out long enough to enable me to regroup our forces. If this maneuver was to succeed, two essential conditions had to be fulfilled. First, our 4th and 5th armies must interrupt their retreat with partial offensives and counterattacks to give me time to assemble a new army on our left. Secondly, the British would have to resist tenaciously and yield ground only very slowly.
Joffre didn't know it, and neither did Sir John French. But that was exactly what the British army was doing. General Smith-Dorrien had decided to fight at Le Cateau. Second Corps was exhausted. It would have to stand and fight. It was strengthened by a new division from England on the left, and Smith-Dorrien hoped that Haig's 2 divisions would show up sooner or later on the right. And so, on August the 26th, the anniversary of Crécy, Le Cateau joined the company of the many insignificant French townships which had been pitchforked into history on a summer morning. Things didn't start too well. It was not the British First Corps which appeared on Smith-Dorrien's right, but the German Third Corps.
They come up like a football crowd leaving Hampstead Park. They come marching up in droves, firing their rifles from their right hips. They have absolutely no idea of aim.
The British cavalry and horse artillery were driven in. The infantry in crude trenches and rifle pits were taken in enfilade, but they held on. And once again, their rifles had wonderful targets.
We'd hardly got our head covered before the ridge, about 3/4 of a mile away, was literally swarming with Germans in their field grey uniforms. And they advanced, and we would receive the order to rapid fire. It was probably 3/4 of a mile away, an extreme range for a rifle, but we rapid fired at 15 rounds a minute at these advancing Germans, and they broke up into smaller groups of probably 6 or 8, advancing through a cornfield where the corn was in stooks.